My name is Chao Tayiana Maina. I am a Kenyan historian and digital heritage specialist. I love exploring how African history, in particular, can be enhanced, preserved, and engaged with through digital technologies. Restitution is a restoration of cultural heritage belongings and human ancestors that were taken and stolen from Africa. Restitution, first and foremost, is an act that confronts the historical injustices that have taken place through colonialism, through imperialism, and that have led to the removal of precious cultural heritage from people's homes, from sacred places, from administrative places. What we are saying is that this removal, this theft, this loss is a great injustice, particularly to Africans who have been denied access to their heritage and who do not have that context of their past because it has been removed from their day-to-day lives. Restitution is not a process that is just about return. And by return, we mean taking an artifact from one place to another. It is a process that is about reconstituting, reconnecting, and one that really looks at repair. It looks at healing. It looks at accountability of ways in which communities can hold their heritage and can use it, whether it's socially, religiously, culturally, and even economically, to the benefit of the people who this heritage belongs to. Cultural heritage belongings, artifacts, and the representations of our cultural heritage are very important because they are not just meaningless artifacts. They are items that are imbued with rich histories, and in many ways they are a connection between the past and the present. If we look at them as a connection, if we look at them as things that tell us stories, we're not just looking at them as singular items. You know, they are removed from places that have specific meaning. They are removed from people and cultures that also have meaning related to these items, you know. And so I think cultural heritage in itself is very crucial for identity, in your worldview, how you look at the world, how you move across the world, but also in how we continue in the present, how we innovate. We are building on our histories and we are building on work that has been done way before us. And it's important that as Africans, we have those connections both in the tangible, the things that we can touch and see, and in the intangible, so the stories and the narratives that we tell about ourselves. People think that restitution is only a discussion or an activity that happens at a governmental level, at a diplomatic level. But the truth is, the most powerful acts of restitution come from the community, come from activists, come directly from the people who feel and identify with this loss and the gaps that this loss has created. The first thing I think that communities can do, activists can do, is awareness, raising awareness. It is very hard for us to know what was taken if people don't talk about what was taken from them, you know. So if there's a particular belonging, an artifact from your community, from your context that was stolen, that was taken away, I think it's very important to raise awareness using whatever forms of media, whether it's television, whether it's online. I think awareness is a very, very critical part in getting governments, getting institutions, getting museums to know that these things are still needed. They are still wanted, they're still loved, and they are still remembered. Now, there are several ways in which restitution can take place, but the first step in different forms of restitution is identifying the belonging, identifying the material. What was it? Where was it from? And where is it now? Because we also need to know or have a general understanding. You might not know exactly where it is in terms of it is in this museum, but you can have a general sense of this was the skull of a particular human ancestor or chief in our community, and it is in the UK, you know. And so search, identification and searching is the first step in really understanding, you know, the context of the belonging. And secondly, there's contacting. So contacting institutions or stakeholders that can help either identify exact locations, so contacting a particular museum if you don't know for sure whether it is there. If you do know for sure, also getting in touch and saying, this is what we are claiming. Contacting national institutions in your country or administrative bodies such as, contacting national institutions in your country or administrative bodies that can help. We have a brilliant case of restitution in Cameroon from the activist Sylvie Njobati, who started with public awareness. She identified an item from her community in Berlin, and she started with a social media campaign which led to protests, which led to pressure on the side of the Berlin Museum, that eventually decided to let go and to give back the item to the people who it belongs to. Now, within that process, there are still several things to identify, as many as governments, who in your government is responsible, the ministries. So there's different processes, I would say. It's not what we have found is that restitution is not a straightforward process, and there's not a singular way to do it, but there are steps. Again, searching and identifying, contacting, and negotiating on what should be returned, and finally understanding what happens when a material comes back, when a belonging comes back. Government bodies are incredibly useful in the restitution process. They can either hamper a restitution process and frustrate it, or make it one that is easier for communities to navigate. The first thing that states can do is come up with policies and frameworks for restitution. A policy is basically a guide that says, if a restitution claim is coming from this country, and by virtue of that, this community and this part of this particular group, then these are the steps that should be followed. Basically, if you have steps, if you have processes, that makes it much easier for people to know how to direct their claims and to know who to direct their claims to. States are also very important in handling things like logistics, negotiating from state to state in terms of understanding what part of restitution, what is happening. There are communities that are also claiming reparations. There are communities that are also claiming reparations and are negotiating for other things, not just the return. They're negotiating also for the intellectual property of their cultural heritage, for any financial benefits that have been gained from this cultural heritage. And states are incredibly useful in helping communities make the demands that are suitable for them. There are many challenges that communities face when they're trying to reclaim their cultural heritage. Number one is not knowing where to start. Through our research, we have found that one of the biggest things that communities are facing is who do I get in touch with? Who can help me? It's not that communities don't know what they want. In fact, you'll find that people are very aware of what was taken. I think oftentimes Western museums like to claim that nobody has asked for these things, so therefore nobody needs them. When in reality, the truth is that there's very much a memory of these belongings, but in many cases, people don't know where to start. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that is being faced. Secondly is the lack of policies and frameworks to make sure that restitution happens in a not necessarily standardized way, but that there are steps that can be followed. And even though these steps can take different paths, there still needs to be, a blueprint of what needs to happen. And so that's a big challenge. Resources. Making a restitution claim requires someone who can perhaps write emails, make contact, so there's a time resource, there's a financial resource, and it doesn't necessarily happen in a day, and oftentimes people are making or working in restitution not as a full-time job. It's something that they're doing, one, because they believe in, and without much resource support. So resources are also a big thing. There's several cultural belongings that are outside of Africa. It's estimated that, from a particular time period, historical time period, the figure is as high as approximately 90% of cultural belongings being held outside this continent, you know. And there are several significant ones when we look at, for example, manuscripts, Ethiopian manuscripts that are held in the UK. In Kenya, we have the remains of freedom fighters such as Koitalel Arab Samoei that are not even known where they are. They're suspected to be in the UK, but still it's not known. In West Africa, we have material that is held in French museums, particularly that is sacred to many, many communities across the region. Everywhere from Northern Africa, I mean, Egypt is embroiled constantly in battles to reclaim archaeological artifacts that were taken from the country. We have the bust of Nefertiti, which has been a restitution demand for many, many years. That is currently held in Berlin. And also to mention that a lot of human ancestors are in basements in Western museums. You know, their remains and their embodiments are held as objects. They're not named, they're not identified. They were taken for very nefarious purposes such as eugenics, to prove that African people are inferior to Western or to Europeans scientifically. So they were used as research objects, you know, for very, very nefarious purposes. Those are still in basements, you know. Some of these material is also preserved using chemicals that are poisonous or that are harmful to human beings, you know. So when they come back, we also have a process of this thing has been destroyed in a way and removed from the human context through this supposed preservation.